Hey everybody, this is vandweller for deucescrack.com, and today, excuse me, it's been a while since I did a video, so I gotta get the rust off the old vocal cords. Um, Ever since I got my second monitor, it's been a lot easier for me to make a note in game of certain hands that I find interesting or difficult or just worthy of further consideration. So what I have been doing is on my one monitor, I have been having my games, and on my other monitor, I keep open this screen in Hold'em Manager. And this screen you can find in the Tourney tab and then the Hand sub tab. And then what I usually do is keep it filtered to today, and I haven't played today, or did I play today? I don't know, according to Hold'em Manager, I don't think I have. Let me get rid of that. Yeah, I played today. So what I do, yeah, is if I see an interesting hand and say the hand I'm playing is that I thought was interesting to look at was pocket threes or something, then I'll just refresh this, wait for the pocket threes to show up, and basically what this tab does is it keeps a running kind of log of all your hands in order, regardless of which table you played them on. So, threes are here, king two is here, king seven is here, and they might have all been on different tables, but they happen sequentially in time, and so it sort of keeps them in time order. So if the hand I was interested in was pocket threes, then I would go over to pocket threes. What you can do is you left click on it once, and then right click on it, and you can say mark selected hands, and then it marks it, right? So then what you can do is go to a certain period of time, we'll go last month, and then you can click show only marked hands, and then hopefully my computer ever catches up to it, all the marked hands will show up. Hold on, let me, that's a pain in the ass. Well, let me pause this while this comes up. There it is. Took long enough. So now what you can do is you can click the only show marked hands ticker right there, little box, and filter it for whatever time you want to look at, and it will only show those hands that you marked. So if you do this over long enough period of time, you'll end up with a good catalog of hands that you thought were interesting or that merited future analysis. So that's kind of what I do, and I periodically go through and look at these hands and try to figure out what the hell I was thinking or why I thought it was necessary to mark them. I know it's late into February, but I didn't really look at my January hands yet, and then I was away in Las Vegas for 2 weeks, which actually went pretty well. And so now we're getting to this point where I really haven't played that much in February, but I haven't looked at my January hands yet, so I figure, I have to look at them anyway. So why not turn on Camtasia and then have Deuces Crack pay me to do something I would already be doing. So that's what this is. These are just hands that I've marked throughout January. I have no idea what these hands are necessarily before I click them. Probably don't even remember why I marked them. In some cases, I'm sure. But look, if there was a hand that I made a mistake on, you'll see it. If there was a hand that was boring, I'll try to get past it as quick as possible. But that's what it's going to be. So I'm going to just start by moving this out of the way and then opening the... Oh, there's a van. I love vans. It's not my van, but I would drive that van. And let me move the replayer over here, and hopefully we got everything on the screen. Actually, you don't need that. I'm trying to make these videos as small as possible physically, so so as to respect your bandwidth, and maybe if this ends up being iPod friendly, who knows. So I guess we'll just plunge in. And this hand, okay, this is Bus, and now Bus is oh, by the way, I'm playing like 20s through 50s on the Sirius network, which is Ultimate Bet and Absolute. I'm playing on the Ultimate Bet side, which I don't think it matters, but Bus is a regular there. He's a winning player, but I think he's a little bit too he doesn't fully understand everything that I do. I mean, not to sound pompous, but I think I understand the game a little bit more than he does, because he often berates me for moves that are totally reasonable. And he's really mean, and he's and he's Russian, and he types in this really hilarious broken English. And anytime I make a move against him that he deems not being a good move, he'll scream at me and say, "Vandweller, you donkey, you need sit and go whiz, you donkey." And so I've sort of made it a practice to mark any hand that he says that I played wrong, just so I can, kind of throw it back in his face in the chat or whatever. You said I played it wrong. Well, I didn't. That kind of thing. So he shoves here with the 855 chips, and now it's on me to call. And what's nice is here in the Hold'em Manager replayer, it tells you exactly what your pot odds are and how often you need to, and translate that into a percentage. Now, of course, in game I don't have that. Of course, I know I have to call 655 in a pot that will eventually be what 855 times 2, so that's 1710 plus 100 is 1810. So I know I have to call 655 in a pot that's going to be 1810. I know so that means I'm not getting quite 2 to 1. So it's not as if I can just be 33% to win. I know that I need to be, roughly, from a pot odds perspective, between 35 and 40% to win or so. And then with the ICM considerations, maybe I need to bump that up to 40% to win. And certainly, now I know I've seen plenty of students that will fold a hand like this because they say, well, the rule is, as set out in certain 2+2 books, the rule is if you're getting 2 to 1, then you pretty much call with any 2 cards. But that is not to say that if you're not getting 2 to 1, that you don't call with some hands in our premiums, does it? No. So you still have to sort of judge your hand against your opponent's range. And of course, in this spot, he's savvy enough to know that he should or could shove a very wide range here because it's a desperation shove, and he could be losing, most of his fold equity by going through the blind. So he does not have to have, I hope you see, a particularly strong hand here to go all in and try to win the blinds and salvage what he can of his tournament. So I deemed that, I guess, in the moment that 10-8 suited was strong enough to call, I guess. And I did call, and then he berated me, and that happened. But he won, so I don't know why he's berating me. But you donkey, you fish. So the question is that a good call? Now, as I said, there's that 2 to 1 rule. If you're getting 2 to 1 and it's a relatively trivial portion of your stack, then you should call. And as I'm repeating, I guess, that's not to say that you shouldn't call if you're not getting 2 to 1. So the question is really, is my equity against his range, given ICM, good enough? And I have to say it is, because what kind of hands would he be shoving here? We can open up the whiz here, and unfortunately I don't have these, since I don't know how to really export hands from Hold'em Manager and get Sit and Go Wizard to recognize them. So I'm gonna have to pause the video here so often and set it up in Sit and Go Wizard. While this video might take an hour, probably for you to watch, probably take me 2 hours to do. So let me go set it up in Sit and Go Wizard and see what we can figure out. So here's what Wizard says given the default ranges that it assigns, and I'm almost certain that he's shoving at least this widely. I can't see him folding a suited king or even any king, and so I think that to me is a reasonable range, if a little tight actually. So I don't see him folding a lot of these hands as well. Maybe the thing is, it's kind of stupid about Sit and Go Wizard is you can't really, the ranges aren't that dynamic, right? They're just, this is what 54.3% of hands looks like for every situation, whereas opponents might opt to shove some of these suited connectors and quasi connectors and fold out some of these big little hands with with 3s and 2s in them. So you can't really get it precisely down, but you can sort of get an idea. And even if he's shoving 50%, now how narrowly would he have to shove? That's the question, right? How narrowly would he have to shove for me to consider folding 10-8 suited? And that's what this, if you go up to, well, we'll click the button here. Go up to this graph tool, for those of you who don't know about it. There's some interesting things here. Now it says the break-even point would be if he's shoving only about 5%. Then if he's only shoving 5% of the time, then I could fold. But if he's shoving any more than that, then certainly the pot odds are going to dictate that I go for it. And so that's sort of the first. There's actually this drop-down box of graphs here And the first one is that, where they put your opponent's hand range on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, and then we put the profitability of our given hand on the y-axis, right? So you can follow this and say, well, if he's shoving 60%, then our profit is 1% of the prize pool, right? That's what the 1 is here, right? The difference between calling and folding is 1% of the prize pool, right? So so that's that graph. The other graph that may not know what it is, just to explain it real quick, is this puts the opponent hand range as the x-axis again, and the y-axis puts the hand range that is a profitable call against whatever range he shows down. So you can see, or we assign him. So here, if he's shoving 30%, then we can call with well, it looks like to be roughly 68% or something like that. And it actually, when you hover over that point, it gives you all the hands that you can profitably call with. And of course, I think that range is actually sensitive to the edge feature, or maybe not. Actually, no, it's not. So those are two interesting tools. As far as the other graphs on there, I think those are relatively new, and I can't quite figure them out. I think it has to do with hand distributions and how often you actually pick up a hand that has a certain profitability, but I'm not quite sure how those two. So if anybody knows what those two or other graphs are about, maybe you can explain those to me in the comments section. So anyway, good call by me, yay. I knew it was, and and this is precisely a hand that you're a donkey. You need to get sit and go wizard. Well, I did. So let's move on to another hand here. And again, I don't know what these hands are going to be before I look at them, so they could be totally boring. Ace King, early position. I remember this guy, even though this was like well over a month ago. I remember this hand. This guy had showed down a couple of weird hands earlier, and I just had the sense that he was, just trying to hit a hand or outplay people, and I just didn't really get a good vibe from him. So I think I remember what happened in this hand. So he flats, and here comes like the driest board in the world. I mean, is there actually... Oh, look at Poker Hose at the table. So this must have been a 50, I think. So Poker Hose at the table. It doesn't matter. So this guy calls, and this is like the driest board on the planet, right? So I make sort of standard half-pot continuation bet, and that happens. So, I mean, it's very easy to say, well, I missed, and, well, I better get out of here. But if you really start to think about the kind of hands he could have to call pre-flop with, and then the hands that he would do this with, it isn't clear to me that Ace-King is necessarily all that far behind, if at all. So in that kind of moment, I must have decided that, well, my hand was at least somewhat of a favorite against him, at least given the pot odds for me to call. I mean, I'm getting 3.22 to 1, so I only have to win this pot 24% of the time from here on in order to justify me putting the extra, whatever, 270 chips in. So the question is, now a lot of guys in this situation, as I said, I've seen a lot of hands from a lot of players. A lot of guys in this situation will decide that they have the best hand, and therefore they shove, because, you have the best hand, so why not shove? And as, I kind of had a spoiler there, and I showed you that I called. But is that necessarily the best policy? Because, okay, I figure that I can put in these 270 chips profitably, right? Because I only need to be 24% to win, at least from a chip perspective, and we're far enough from the bubble where we can more or less talk about our chip perspective and not worry about ICM as much. You can pretty much hand ranges rule when you're like 7+ handed. So I figure that I'm ahead, but does that mean that I should shove? Well, as I said, I figure that I can profitably put in these 270 chips. Now, the question is, can I put in the rest of those chips, the extra 645 chips profitably? It's not clear to me that I can, because, okay, I put in those 270 chips at a profit, but if I shove, right, he's going to fold out every single hand that is well, not every single hand, but he's going to fold out almost every hand that I beat, and he's going to call me uh, most of the time with hands that I'm behind. Now, he might show up with ace queen or some weird 7-8 or something, but most of the time you fold out the ones that you beat and you get called by the ones that you are behind. So in that scenario, those extra chips, while these initial chips just to call go in at a profit, the extra chips to go all in don't go in at a profit. And the other thing is too, I don't feel that I have much fold equity, in the sense that if I shove here, I think the pot's going to be so large that if he has anything, he's going to call me. So what I decide to do is, since I can put these chips in at a profit, I decide what I'm going to do is sort of create my own stop and go. Now, I apologize if this seems too fancy for sit and go play, but I think if you can, if you can justify it and talk your way through a hand, then so be it. So I decide what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it, sort of create my own stop and go play, because the pot will end up being about 1140, and he'll have roughly a pot size bet left that I can maybe bet and buy myself that fold equity that I don't feel that I have now, and sort of let another card come out that maybe scares him into folding. And also in this circumstance, a call is a lot scarier than a shove, right? Like, he could see me shoving maybe an ace king because I have overcards, but a call here looks like I actually have something when I really only have ace high. So I decide to call, and I proceed with my plan, despite the fact that this fills a couple draws, or well, just one draw really, a kind of a long shot 9-7 draw. Even though that fills in that draw, I decide that I'm going to go ahead with my plan and bet, and he does in fact fold. So is it fancy play syndrome? I don't think so, because I think every step of the way was a good decision. So I mean, that just goes to show you that, for one thing, you don't necessarily have to let people play with you or make moves against you if you can sort of snuff them out, if you can sort of suss it out, right? I mean, I figured that was sort of the kind of raise on the flop that you would make if you knew a guy was making a continuation bet and you were somewhat prone to fancy play yourself. So that was my read of it, and I went with it, and I tried to play it the best way that I could. So be it. If you don't like it, to hell with you. Let's take a look at another hand here. So here's pocket kings. Again, I don't know what these are when I open them. So pocket kings. I do that, and that guy does that. So we see a flop, and I hit the bingo card there. And so obviously I'm happy and trying to eventually get my stack all in. So this guy decides to dunk into me. Now again, it would be very easy for me to shove here, because I see a lot of guys do that, right? A lot of guys say, well, I got the best hand. A guy bets into me, and if a guy's putting chips in, he's virtually guaranteed to come all the way with me. Well, you got to know that that's not the case, right? I mean, I could very easily, I have too much fold equity here against a raise, right? I could very easily shove, and this donk bet, donk bets don't typically end up being anything, right? It's usually just a guy who has some sort of weak draw or pair or something like that, and he just wants to see if you'll go away. So I decide I don't particularly want to go away, and I don't want him to go away, right? So I decided just flat call, right? He bets into me. I obviously have the best hand. He could have any number of hands, and I just want to either let him keep firing, or at least get see another card and just see what happens. But again, I see a lot of players just shove here. I have the best hand. That guy bets, so he's going to come along. But you can't really assume that. So why not let this guy continue to fire at me if he's going to, and kind of underrepresent the strength of my hand? Now, of course, you are taking a risk in letting another spade drop, or letting an 8 drop, or 5, or whatever hand might complete his draw, or give him a draw to a draw or something like that. But look, that's not going to be the case in the overwhelming majority of cases, and I feel if a hand comes out, I could still make decent decisions afterwards. So I decided to call. Oh, and the other consideration too is if this pot were smaller, right? If somehow this pot were like 600 or somehow this pot were a lot smaller. See, because my goal is to get all in with this hand eventually, and if this pot were a lot smaller relative to the stacks, then I would have to put in a raise somewhere along the way, right? Because what you don't want to do is leave yourself for the fact that you call the flop and call the turn, and all of a sudden have like 2 times the pot left in your stack on the river, where it's going to be very difficult for you to get all in with it unless someone makes a re-raise, and in that case, a lot of guys will go away. So here I'm in no danger of that, because if he bets 600 and I call 600, to put another 1,200 in the pot, that'll be 3,150, and I'll have 2,300 behind, and that's going to be relatively easy to get all in the span of 2 streets. So I'm in no danger of missing value for my hand here, and that's why I opt to call. Now the 9 comes out, puts another draw on the board, completes kind of a long shot draw, kind of weird draw that he might potentially have, but you can't worry about that. And he bets again 900. So at this point, I mean, obviously I'm committed to the hand. So, and the other thing is too, I feel like if I shove here, he's probably going to, he might call a lot with, any of the cards that end up having draws, he's going to call with anyway. So if those draws are going to come in, they're going to come in anyway, right? If he has the draw and I shove on him, he's calling, and the draw is just going to be whatever, the card's going to come as it comes. So I'm committed now, so I'm going to be committed even if I just call here and see a flop and see a river and call off, right? So since I'm committed in that regard, I may as well let him continue to bet any weak hands that he might have on one more street. So I decide merely, again, to just call and slow play it. And that comes out pretty bad card for my hand. He completes what could be his most plausible draw, which is, a flopped spade draw. And it also puts, queen 10 in there and 10-8 or something like that. So it completes a lot of draws, but I was committed on the turn anyway, and the river was going to be what it was. And I just as easily could have put my thumb over the river card and played it anyway. So I'm committed. He goes ahead and bets. I call, and he ends up with ace-5. Total 3-street bluff, which is amazing, that a guy will do that, but he did. So, again, by not shoving on him when, I got the best hand, I shove, because I'm afraid of getting outplayed on further streets, and I'm afraid of, letting a guy catch up a little bit, I got, like, the maximum value for my hand against what ended up being not a hand at all. So I think I played that hand pretty well, and I think, the slow plays were justified. So now I marked another hand, and this ended up being the very next hand. I don't know exactly what happened, but it looked like it was the very next hand against the same guy. So that's probably going to color the way that I played this hand, right? So it folds to him, he min raises, and look, I'm getting, there's antes. I'm getting better than 3-1 on a min raise, calling from the big blind, and I'm going to have position throughout the hand against a very bad player with a fairly decent hand. Now that doesn't sound like that bad a scenario. Now a lot of guys here might reshove, and that certainly would have been an option. But then again, I think he's going to fold a lot of the hands that I might potentially get value from, and he's going to call with a lot of the hands that dominate me. So I figure why not keep the pot a little small while I have a positional advantage and I'm getting pretty good pot odds. I don't see how that can be necessarily a bad scenario. So I do call, and the flop comes out that. Now I think I'm still going to be in my rope-a-dope mode, right? Now the only problem is that I could end up dominated a lot of the time. But I do have a draw and a backdoor draw. I have a draw to a straight and a backdoor flush draw. So we'll just see how it goes. And he bets again. And I mean, there's just no way I can fold to this. But again, I don't think raising necessarily has a lot of value. So I hit my 5. And so that gives me 2 pair. And he bets again. And I don't even remember what I do here. I probably should raise now, because if there are hands that I'm worried about being dominated by, well, that's no longer an issue. Of course, you could suck out, but your opponent can always suck out. You can't worry about that. So any of the hands that I'm worried about being dominated against are gone, or at least that's not an issue. And the only thing I have to worry about is if he has a 4. Now, for some reason, I decided to just call, which I think is probably a mistake. I mean, I do create a pot such that I have less than that in my stack. So maybe I'm hoping he'll just fire again. See, if I raise here, I'm going to shut out a lot of his donking range on the river. So I decided to just call. And then that card comes out. And he bets again. And I really should raise here for value. I don't know, the turn should I have raised? Yeah, I mean, I think it's close because again, on the turn, I guess I would shut out a lot of his donking range. But then again, if I have him dominated, then we're gonna get all in, and I'll be a pretty good favorite. But I think there is more in his donking range than there is in the hands that I've than Ace X that I have dominated. So, or that would have me dominated if I didn't hit 2 pair. So I decided to call because I think there's probably more value in just letting him donk and play a river. And here, I probably should raise. I hope I do. And I just flat call, which I think that's kind of a bad mistake. I think I certainly can raise for value. He might call me with a jack. I have 2 pairs, so any weird 2-pair combination that he might have, or any ace that he has except for ace jack. I think that was a mistake not to raise, and he ends up showing down king 10. So again, I think I got more value on this hand than I could have. Now, of course, if I reshoved all in, I wonder if he would have called me. But the hands that would call me are kind of a narrow range, I think, and I would fold out a lot of the hands that he otherwise might have donked away a lot of chips at. So overall, I think I played the hand okay, but I certainly could have raised the river. So there you go. See, warts and all, you get to see everything. So I don't know what this hand is. King 9. I have no idea what hand that was. Why I marked it. Could have been a misclick. No idea. Let's see here. Alright, so here's Bus, my old buddy. And he puts in a min raise. Now, if we look at the stack setup, how are the stacks set up? Well, I'm chip leader, as always. As I usually find myself. And we have a guy here in the big blind who has a very short stack. He has 3 blinds behind with 1 in the middle. And yet Bus here is min raising. Now, you could very easily just fold 5-7 and kind of let that happen and let Bus maybe take on Therapist. And, hopefully you can bust the bubble, and there you are, you're with cash, yippee. But I think there's a bit more profitable way to do it. Now, I know Bus is capable of making some steals, and, he's a regular. And to me, this bet says, what does this bet say to you? Now, if I were to make a small raise here, right, say I were in Bus's position, what would my small raise here mean? Now, my small raise here would mean I have a hand that I think is capable of taking on the big blind and knocking him out, but not so great that I want to commit a lot of chips. So I'm going to put a bet here just in case someone messes with me, and this guy and those 2 guys get all in, that I can sort of get away from without having committed too many chips. That's what that bet says to me, in quotation marks. So if you have an opponent that basically tells you, I have a good hand, but not a great hand, and I really don't want to mess with anybody that has me covered or could potentially threaten my entire tournament. Someone says that to you, then what's the right move, right? I mean, sort of classic poker wisdom from Mike Caro, right, is find out what your opponent wants you to do and disappoint him, right? So, I mean, that's like very old advice, but I think it goes along here. Now, of course, you got to recognize that Bus is very risk averse against me, right? I mean, there's a really short stack here, and Bus, if I were to say theoretically shove on him, he would really only be able to call. It's one of those situations where you open up sit and go wizard, and he's only able to call with like queens and above, right? And certainly this range is not queens and above. This is never, in my opinion, a hand like that. All right, I think my read in the hand is pretty good, so I decide I don't care what my hand is. Bam! Right? I just slam all in over him with 5-7 offsuit. And unfortunately, this guy calls, and Bus predictably folds. And unfortunately, I have to show down against Ace King. But the risk was pretty low because this guy, I'm still in the tournament, sort of healthy chips. I'm still in second place. And this guy, would very easily might have folded if he didn't have a hand like this, right? Which is only going to come around, the single digits portion of the time. So, 90+% of the time, he ends up folding, and Bus for sure is going to fold. And again, this is a hand that when Bus saw it, he couldn't believe that I did it. But I routinely do that. To me, the whole point of the bubble, and when you're the chip leader, is to find situations in which your opponents are risk averse, and punish them for it. It's not their fault that they're risk averse, maybe, but you got to punish them anyway, whether it's just or not. So there will be other examples of that kind of play, I think, coming up, because I do mark those a lot because I find them wildly entertaining. So, for example, this is probably the same kind of situation. So, couple of folds. This guy decides to min raise, and again, with these two short stacks here, with his stats that indicate that he's going to be somewhat aggressive, and he's not a tighty whitey. He min raises here, and if you put chips in against me when you are risk averse, boom, that's going to happen. And I don't necessarily care what my hand is, because you have to be so risk averse that while you might have a wide range to do that with, you can only call so narrowly, and the difference between the range you put the chips in with and the range that you're going to call with is so wide that this has to be profitable, again, given how risk averse you are. Now, I'm not giving you guys license to do this. If you want to, do this kind of stuff, and if you're already not doing it, then you might want to work it in. Maybe you won't do it with A2 cards, but maybe some robust-looking hands, like Jack 9 is, fairly decent, okay hand. But you always want to make sure that, you have a guy who is risk-averse against you. If all these guys have more equal stacks, then this guy wouldn't have as much equity at risk to call me. So it wouldn't be nearly as effective a move. So you want to make sure that you have, at least one really small stack or two very small stacks, and are doing it against a guy who's maybe in second place and has a good size stack if he were to fold, because this guy can easily see, well, if he folds, he's still going to have a good lead over everybody else. So I do that kind of move routinely. And I think it really, that's one of the things that, well, I don't make enough firsts. Well, maybe you should do this kind of stuff when you're already the chip leader. So we'll take a look at another hand here. Queen 9. I remember this hand. This hand is sort of the same idea, but I decided to get cute. Now, even though it's three-handed, there's a short stack here who I don't particularly care if he calls me or not, but I figure that I can, this guy is, again, really risk-averse against me. Even though it's three-handed, there's still ICM, and the equity ceiling 75%. So if a guy puts in chips against me when he's very risk-averse, and I have fold equity, then I'm going to punish him. Now, what does this guy's limp say to me? This guy's limp says to me, I want to help you knock this guy out, right? That's what it says. So I figure what his plan is to limp here, maybe expect me to limp along, and then expect this guy to bet. He's going to call, and then he wants me to call, right, so that we can knock him out. But I don't want to go for that. There's very few times that I feel like trying to get into a check down situation is positive for me, especially when I'm the chip leader. So this guy limps in, and I pretend to go along with his plan. I remember this. It's fancy play, but I think it's justified. So this guy on cue does that, and for some reason Hold'em Manager doesn't recognize that he has his ante in there. But he's all in, actually. And so this guy on cue again decides to call. And so my plan was to get this guy to put in just a few extra chips so that when I do my BAM, I'll have that much bigger of a pot to win, right? So everybody acts as though, just as I expect them to. And I go, BAM. And this guy spoils the party and calls me. Now, I know this can't be a strong hand, but, we can show it down. But to me, again, if you can find a guy who's risk averse against you, get him to put chips in the pot, then take those chips away, because you're just using his risk aversion against you. Now, to be fair, he's not as risk averse once this guy goes all in, because now all he has to do is not come in third in the hand, and he gets second place. So maybe this might have been a little too fancy. Maybe if I just out and out shoved, I would have had more a better chance of winning the hand. But let's see. I mean, I know I lost it because the line and hold the manager is red, so see what he shows up with. I don't have anything, and he shows with twos, which is, okay. And he he limp called all in with 10-8 suited, so. And so how little did I know that Queen 9 offsuit was for value. But again, so it's the same principle that I was talking about. It just took a little bit more of a fancy form. Again, you guys get to see all. I'm just going in order in the hands and not really skipping any. So you get to see all the the weirdness that I do. Ace 4 suited. Again, I mean, you really? I mean, you know what's going to happen, right? This guy limps in. Now this is a little bit thinner because by folding, this guy has a lot worse stack since he put in like a full 3 times raise. Plus the full 3 times raise sort of indicates a much stronger hand. And yet I've seen this guy at the table several times, and he seemed to be fairly reasonable and seemed to understand somewhat, the kind of sit and go dynamic and risk aversion. I don't know. He just seemed to be somewhat reasonable. And yet he had, stats through a small number of hands, which indicated that he would play from his small blind. So, plus I have the ace as a blocker. So at least there's one fewer ace that he could have. So if I do get called, maybe I'll have a little bit better equity. So I decide, you're risk averse. Even though, again, this is a lot thinner. And here I probably wouldn't do it with any 2 cards. I think having the ace blocker, being suited helps. So I would do it with a lot of robust looking hands, just because he just doesn't seem to be as risk averse. Now, of course, if this guy had min raised or put in a raise, it would be a lot easier, right? Then I could do it with a lot wider range because he's much more risk averse against me. But I decide to do that, and Axel folds. Boom. God, I love those. Ace 9. Don't know what this one is. To me, that seems kind of obvious. I don't know why I marked that. The only consideration would be there's no small blind, so there's a lot less reward, and that maybe this guy would shove and knock himself out. But I don't know why I marked that at all. Seems pretty easy. Sometimes I will mark a hand if I want to mark the game that it occurred in, and I couldn't find the hand. So say maybe 2 hands earlier there was a hand that I wanted to mark, but I just couldn't find it in the list. Like where's the 6-7? And I can't find it, so I'll just mark a subsequent hand just to mark that game so I can go back and look. And maybe that's what this was. Don't know. Ace 4. Do I call with the ace 4? That's a good question. See a lot of guys fold an ace 4 in this circumstance. Why might you fold an ace 4? Well, there's another guy who's a short stack who, if you fold, you can go through the blinds and let him maybe eliminate himself. On the other hand, as I said, this might be that same game that I whomped him in. This, this is a very wide range, and in fact, it's probably very close to any 2. I mean, he's a good aggressive player, it seems like. Oh no, this is actually a different player. But Alex 0104, as far as I know, is a winning player. So to me, this is a very wide range. And what am I getting pre-flop? I'm getting 41% pre-flop. This might end up being a bad call. Let's whiz this one. I wonder exactly what I can call with is my question. I think that's probably why. Did I end up calling? I ended up folding. So, but I guess why I marked it is because I wanted to see what I could actually call with. So let's set it up in the whiz and see. So we got the whiz. Here's the whiz all set up for us. And now, of course, the default ranges it says to fold. Obviously, we have 39%. We're not that big of a favorite. So let's look at the chart and just see how widely. Now look at that. He has to be shoving. I mean, I don't know if you can see that right there on that screen, but there's like a little tick above. And so it looks like there's no circumstance under which we can call. And we'll just see his range versus our range. I mean, if he's shoving 100% of the time, we can only call with 26% or so, roughly. And so let's just give him that. Let's give him that 100. I can never get that slider to go all the way to 100. 100. Maybe the figure is 3-2 is so bad. So, if he's literally shoving any 2, then it's pretty thinly positive. So I think that's probably a good fold then. So yippee, yay! I've been borne out. And if he's shoving any two, then excuse me. Guess I'm allergic to any two calls. If he's literally shoving any two, then we still can only call a very narrow range. And it isn't clear to me that he's shoving literally any two. I mean, most guys will fold out the bottom of their range when a call is likely, right? I mean, I've got very few chips here, so I can't, he might be thinking that I can call him because, my tournament is in a lot of respects over because I'm so short, so that I might decide to call him, fairly widely. And so if he knew, I mean, you can sort of play this if he knows that I know games. Like if I thought that he was shoving any two, then I would call 26.4%, right? But if we make him, if we become the hero, and then we have a guy, well, look at that. Even if he knows I'm calling as if he's shoving any two, he still has to shove any two, right? So he probably missed a. Well, no, he did shove. But anyway, all that being said, it looks like the ace-4 is probably a good fold, or at least, not terrible, because you can make a case for having to make a negative call, because if you fold, I mean, every time you basically when you're short and the blinds are coming around, every time you fold, you lose equity. So that means that you don't have to necessarily wait for a positive move. You can wait for you can basically you're looking for your your least unprofitable move, right? So anyway, good fold the ace-4, I think. I'd be interested to hear what you guys would say about that, if you'd ever fold that or call that, or which direction you guys would go in. But the Wiz seems to think that it's a break-even call against any two, and it's not clear he's against any two. So here's an ace-king hand. I mean, a pocket king's hand. I don't know what it is. There's a limper, and here I misclicked. I remember this. I would never make this raise. This is a misclick, and this is exactly what it would be if you clicked Ultimate Bet has a half pot button, and that's what I must have hit, because there's no way that I make this raise. Normally I'm making it 450. So that happens, but you still have to play the hand. So everybody's nightmare scenario, they have kings and an ace comes out. So I check, and he checks behind. Now to me, a limper, he merely calls, he doesn't limper raise me or anything. He merely calls that. So and he would call with a wide range because I gave him incredible odds with my misclick. Now why isn't it showing the? Oh, I see. All right. So I gave him really good odds with my misclick, so he would come along basically with any hand that he had limped. So I check, as I would do in this circumstance, and he checks behind. Now I just don't feel like he has an ace, because I feel like he would bet it. Now I could be waiting a street to bet it, but he checks again. So this is almost never an ace. And I feel like I don't, but I also feel like I can't really bet for value on this board, right? Where's the value? The value maybe comes from a 10 or from a heart draw. But I think, and that's only maybe from a 10. Who knows? He might get spooked by the ace and fold if he had a 10. So I just don't see the value in betting myself. So I figure there's more value in letting him bet. And again, I just don't see the value on the board on the river. And so he bets out, and there's no way this is an ace. I can't really raise here for value, though, because what calls me that I beat? Right? What are the actual hands that if I were to raise, all the chips over and above 450 would be profitable? I don't see that. But I do feel like I can make a call, and he has Jack 10. So maybe there was value against a 10, but I don't think a 10 is a huge part of his range. And I don't know. I think I played that one fairly well, just by checking and not making bets that don't make money, right? I mean, on this, if I bet here on the flop, I don't see how that makes money. I guess I sort of ring the register and just kind of take the pot in a lot of the times when he doesn't have an ace. But I just feel like he doesn't fold when he has an ace, and he folds almost all the hands that I'm ahead of. So again, on the turn, same thing. On the river, same thing. It's just I don't think those bets make money. All right, so we have a 10-8 suited, and oh boy, that was a bad fold on my part. This is, if I have one leak, this is it. My one leak is I'm not saying I only have one leak, but the one that comes to mind that I sort of grapple with is that I sometimes have a hard time shoving on people who are risk averse against me, but who have me covered. And this is an exact scenario, just like that. This guy is really risk averse against me, right? If I were to shove on him and he were to call and he were to lose, well, he would be in really rough shape, right? And if he were to call and win, he would double his stack, but, you know, he has probably roughly 25% or 28% equity in the tournament, and by winning, maybe he'd have about 40 or something like that. So he's risking 28 to win 12. So he's in a pretty... no, but he wouldn't be out if he called and lost. So maybe he'd have... Maybe have 7% equity or something in the tournament. So he's risking 21 to win 12. I don't know exactly what he would have, but, you know, somewhere in there. So that's the leak I have. I do not shove on people as often as I ought to when they have me covered. And if we bring this up in Sit and Go Wizard, we can sort of work it out. Whoops. We can sort of work it out. If I were to shove on him, what would he realistically call with? He has to realize that he is, I would hope, he's pretty risk averse and he can't really call with much. So maybe he would call me down with something like that, in which case I can shove any 2 cards, right? Now, of course, the problem is, once in a while, a guy will not understand his equity context, and then he'll start calling you, you know, weaker and weaker hands, but I can still shove on him, even though it ends up being sort of close to the bottom of the hands that I can shove. You know, if he's calling much wider than that. Now, what hands could he? Again, we can make ourselves him and say, well, if we were to get shoved on, even by any 2 cards, what could he call with? And he could only call that wide, even if it were any 2 cards, right? So if we put ourselves as us again, give ourselves our same hand, and what was our hand? 10-8 suited. Whoops, I'm supposed to give me. Sorry, supposed to give me 10-8 suited, and assume that he's only calling. Well, yeah, that's actually what it. Of course, you know what's weird is that sometimes on the calling side and the pushing side, Sit and Go Wizard figures ranges differently. But you know, give him 10% of hands, and we can still shove. So that's kind of what I feel that's a leak that I have, that I don't punish people enough who have me covered when they still ought to be really risk averse. So that was a hand that I messed up. And again, you guys get to see sort of warts and all, everything that I do bad, and that's okay. I'm all right with that. Jack 8 suited. Now, of course, let's see. This table is actually all decent regulars. Actually, everybody here is a winning player. Flinza was actually one of my first ever students, maybe like over 2 years ago. And Ryan B, he's a little chatty, and Judd is he thinks he's better than he actually is, but he's also very, very tight again in certain circumstances when he's risk averse. So now there's other scenarios which I reshoved on people. There was a very clear short stack. Now while these guys are fairly short, and this guy is basically 5 blinds, there's no micro stack, that's in immediate danger of going out. So this is a lot thinner, but I feel like I have sort of a read on Judd that if he makes a raise, which he does go ahead and do, and it's a smaller raise, I feel like he can fold a large portion of the time, because I just feel like he's going to be risk averse against me, and he thinks that I'm tight, and he also doesn't think I'm particularly good. Because I show down a lot of weird stuff, like Jack 8 suited. And also what's coloring this hand is that Jack 8 suited is my favorite hand, and I will never fold it if I reasonably don't have to. I don't know what it is. It's just always been my favorite hand since the very beginning, especially of hearts. So this guy raises, and what's good about his raise is that he's leaving himself with a good number of chips. If he had made it like 3x, like 1200, then he'd be leaving himself with a lot lower stack and would be slightly less risk averse against me. But here he leaves himself with a good stack, so I feel, boom, make him fold, right? So again, there's like a whole bunch of chips that I didn't have, and now, my lead is further solidified. So again, always be on the premise of finding people who are risk averse and punishing them for it. This is certainly going to be another example, right? I hope you guys don't mind sort of examples of the same thing. Oh, okay. Well, this one nobody put in chips, but this is just me realizing that Bus is very has to be very risk averse here. That he's a winning player who probably realizes how risk averse he has to be, and even if he knows what I'm up to, there's very little he can do about it. And even though this shove is for over 13 blinds, well, there's no rule that says you can't shove over 13 blinds, and again, that's going to make him even tighter, so I just bam on him, and there's nothing he can do with this short stack there. Here's another Queen 6 hand. So this is, should I call, right? Now Judd is a regular. Judd knows what's up. He knows about the desperation shove. He's heard of it, I'm sure. He's done it. So he does not have to have a particularly wide range here because this is his last bit of fold equity. Now he's not necessarily going to be on any two cards, but he's going to have a very wide range here. And Queen 6 suited is actually a pretty robust hand against a wide range. So if I'm getting, let's see, what am I getting? I'm getting over 2-1. So from a chip perspective, I can probably call any two cards, right? 31%. Now, of course, we know that chips aren't equity, and what we're really playing with is equity, and that equity is really just, and chips are really an illusion, but, they can be sort of a guide to what to do. Now, from a chip perspective, if I can call with any two cards, then ICM isn't going to turn what I need from 31% to something like 60%, is it? No. I'm still a low stack. There's still two stacks that are way ahead of both of us. So maybe ICM turns this from me needing to be 31% to something like 38%. Who knows? We can figure it out maybe. I can open up Sit and Go Wizard. And so I've set up the hand there. And now with the default ranges, looks pretty bad. But there's no way that he is only shoving 30%. No way in hell. So we can actually look at the graph and just see how widely he would have to shove for me to make a profitable call. And it says 57% of the time. And if we look at what that actually looks like, I think there's no doubt that it's 57% or even more. And I'm probably willing to take sort of a negative expectation on this, a healthy one, maybe even, I don't know, negative 20%. Why? Because every time we go through the blinds, or every time we fold a hand, our equity gets worse. So actually, I didn't even set the whoops, I didn't set the blinds right. Hold on. The blinds are 500, so whew, good. And actually what's weird is that this doesn't, for some reason, the absolute structure, even though Sit and Go Wizard doesn't have the 500 level. So let's just check the 200, 400 level. And if it's correct in the 200, 400 level, then it has to be correct in the 250, 500, right? Because there's more reward, and more of our stack is in the middle, and we have less behind, right? So it'll be a, yeah. So here we go. So even if he's shoving 41%, and let's check out the graph now, actually, now that it's more accurate, and that's a lot better, right? So if he's shoving at least say 38%, then we can call, and I think it's pretty clear that he is. So even though it's for my quote tournament life mostly, or if I fold, I'm pretty much out of the tournament. If I call and lose, I'm pretty much out of the tournament. There's really no such thing as tournament life, right? If you remember from all my other videos, we talk about I've talked about that the equation that sort of governs, for example, a shove, right? So on the one side, if your opponent folds, you win the equity represented by the blinds, and if he calls, you gamble, and you either win the gamble and lose the gamble, and you win and lose the requisite amount of equity. Now, there's nothing in there that says You know, if he folds, you win, and if he calls, you gamble. But if it's for your tournament life, then add 3 points. You know, there's nothing in there that says that. Your tournament life doesn't exist. All it exists is your risk-reward context, right? Tournament life, there's no such thing. So certainly in a 200, 400 blind level, it's correct. Then it's got to be even more correct if it's 250, 500, which I just don't seem to have for some reason. So, I mean, we can do 300, 600, and then it becomes we call with anything. But, you know, we're not quite there. So certainly queen six suited. If you're folding hands like that, just because you're short and he's short and you're trying to, like, out-survive him, well, when you fold, right, when you fold in this scenario, you're just conceding to him too many chips, and he's going to have too big of a lead on you if he wins. Hold on. For some reason, too big of a lead on you if he wins, or at least you're letting him back in, which is no good. So what actually ended up happening? Do I win? And he shows down 10-9. So look at that. I was even quote ahead. So there you go. Let's go on to another hand. I hope these are interesting hands to you. Let's see, Ace Jack. So a lot of I'm not sure why I chose this hand, but for one thing, do not fold Ace Jack here. Now, of course, the ultimate bet has one of the lowest starting structures that exists online. It has a 5-10 level in the turbos that it starts out as. 5-minute levels, it starts 5-10. I know a lot of you know, people tend to tighten up against a limper in the early levels because they don't want to get involved. You know, they hear that, you know, there's a bias against confrontation, so don't confront. So whatever you would otherwise raise with, don't raise with it because you're getting into a pod and that's dangerous. Well, that's true if you're a beginning player, but if you know a little bit and you have experience, then extra chips in the pot is a reason to go after them, right? Now add that to the fact that, do I end up raising here? Yeah. So add that to the fact that Jay Hen is a regular winning player, right? So if a regular winning player limps in the early levels, what does he have? In middle position, what does he have? He has a medium to small pocket pair, right? Almost all the time. 90% of the time that's what he has. Sometimes he'll show up with some suited ace or something. But when you have a guy with such a restricted range, it's easy to know what he has. It's easy to play a flop against him, right? So I raise and isolate him out, get position on him. He calls predictably. You know, I mean, if he'd have folded, that would have been nice, but I'm not worried about a call. Now, of course, I put him on a medium to small pocket pair, and this kind of flop hits that range fairly hard. He doesn't have to have a set here for him even to continue. He could have pocket sevens. He could have pocket nines, pocket fours, and still continue. And so he makes a donk bet into me, and which wouldn't be a bad idea if he had a set, right? Because he starts building the pot, right? What did I do? Now I decide that he doesn't have to have a set or anything to do this, and he doesn't have to have much of a hand. I mean, he could very easily have pocket fours, pocket threes, pocket sevens, pocket, you know, anything in there. And I'm still going to go with my read and put in a raise against him. I don't know why I made it 2.5 times, but I did. Probably should have just made it full 3 times, but so be it. So he calls. And the 2 comes out, and now I figure if he checks, then he's just asking me to take the pot away from him, as if, like, he's willing to play one street with his pocket pair, but if who he also knows is a winning regular player in these games, that if I am going to fire the second, but he doesn't know that I can fire a second barrel at all, and so I'm willing to do that, and I just hit the half pot button. Maybe I should have bet a little more, but I figure I don't have to bet more because I think he's going to fold to this line if he doesn't have a set. And you know what? And if he comes along and check raises me or calls, then I'm just going to shut down. But I figure since that range is so restricted that I can fire a second barrel and get a fold out of a hand that I beat, and I just can't give up that opportunity. And he actually does end up folding. So this is not. It might seem like overly fancy play, but the point is this: the blinds here, you start 150 blinds deep, right? And I'm going to talk about this in a future video, but you are not particularly risk averse for the top of your stack. While we know about a thing called bias against confrontation, Um, there's very little bias against confrontation when you're playing with the chips at the top of your stack, like in a small pot. Um, and so you can more or less play poker and go with reads, especially here we're 150 blinds deep, and I have room to make people fold, and you can sort of play pots like that. Now, if you're playing on like full tilt where it starts at 1530, or some other structure where it starts around there, then there's not as much room to play some poker. But there is a little bit of room here, especially against a guy who I know exactly how he plays, and I know how he thinks I play, and I can sort of double barrel against him and take it down a good portion of the time. So anyway, might be a little fancy, but hey, it worked, so screw you. Coming up on an hour. I'll do a few more hands, and it's a shame because I have a lot more hands I could go through. I don't know if you guys want a part two. If you guys want a part two and you want me to go through some other hands, especially where there's a lot of red down here, so you can see hands that I lost, let me know, and I will go through the rest of my January hands with you. So I'll try to go through a few more and just see what shows up. Pocket nines. I don't know why I picked that hand. That seems to be pretty obvious. So we won't pick that hand. Queen 10 suited. Why did I pick this one? Oh, sometimes I'll pick a hand because I think it's interesting to look at, whether a guy's call against me was right. And it's also interesting to me that, okay, this is against Judd, who I said was kind of a regular, so I'm going to play him a fair amount. What a guy calls you with, if he's a regular, is going to sort of indicate what he thinks you're up to, right? So by seeing what he calls with, that's going to tell me, how he's going to play against me and what he thinks I'm doing, so then I can adjust later. So what is my actual range here? Now, I think Judd is fairly tight. So, it's also the fact that I do have a slight lead on somebody, more or less tied for the last place, third and fourth, with another guy. So I'm not super risk averse, but I have initiative going in. I can make him fold, and I do feel that he's going to be fairly tight against me. So let's bring this up in the wizard. I mean, there's no doubt that Queen 10 suited itself, is going to be a shove, right? I mean, that's not the question. That's not why I marked it like, well, should I have shoved Queen 10? It's how did Judd react, and is that reaction appropriate to how I'm actually playing? So what am I actually shoving here? I'm probably shoving, any number of robust looking kind of suited hands. Obviously, pairs, aces, pocket pairs, any ace, every suited king, almost every unsuited king, probably every suited queen or almost all of them. A lot of the robust looking queens, and then, Broadway cards, suited or unsuited. A lot of suited quasi connectors. So that's probably going to be about 50 to 60% of the time. So let's see if he's him, what he should call with against that, right? So I push here. Let's give myself a range that looks like what I would shove. And that's going to be somewhere in there. Something like that. And so he can actually call me with any ace. Now, he's not particularly risk averse against me, is he? Right? I mean, he's got a big stack. So now I know that there are guys in this scenario, in this exact scenario, who are, not winning players, who will fold a lot of hands. Now, for some reason, it's not showing the blinds. I don't know why. Oops. Well, there it was. I wanted it to show the blind, though. A lot of winning players who will fold a hand like the one he eventually showed down, which to me is ridiculous. You're not particularly risk averse, and you got a guy against with a wide range. So he calls with ace 8, so he knows what's up, right? He's not being fooled. He knows, what I'm up to, and he understands his equity context enough that he knows that he can call with a hand like that fairly easily. So now, if I were on any two, I mean, look how widely he can call me if he knew where I'm on any two. Like, people think, oh, the bubble, you got to be tight against a raise. But if I were on any two, literally, and that's, maybe I would be, or at least there are some guys who would be, he can call over 50% of the time with some fairly junky-looking hands. So, while there's no question of my own play in this hand, it's interesting to see sometimes what a guy is allowed to call you with in a certain circumstance, and you can sort of learn what you should call with. So here, I mean, are there a lot of you out there that would call a guy, maybe a regular, with Jack 5 suited for 10 blinds? Probably not, but you could if you knew we were on any two. And we can go and look at the graph and just see how widely all that shakes out. Well, let's give a, well, it doesn't matter what we give him because we're doing a range versus range, right? Oops, that's not what I wanted. I don't know what that is. But, you know, if we're shoving 100, he can call with 50 over 50%. If we're shoving 90% and just folding the bottom of our range, which there are a lot of guys right there who are like that, they'll shove about 80 to 90%. And in that scenario, he can call over 40%. So, you know, just because you shove here for 10 blinds and a guy calls you with a junky looking hand like Jack 7 offsuit, don't necessarily say, "Oh, what a donkey. What an idiot." Well, maybe maybe you're pretty transparent and you're not as sneaky as you think you are, right? So we'll do a couple more hands. What was that? That was the Queen 10. I think I have another Queen 10. I don't know what this hand is. No idea. Oh, yeah, okay. This is a hand sometimes I'll mark hands because I think they're instructive and I intend to use them. There are a lot of guys who in the cutoff, you know, they'll be loose in the small blind. They might be loose on the button, but once the cutoff happens, they sort of go into like their autopilot mode. You know, like you'll be playing 10 tables, and you will, and you know, you'll make a special, you know, sort of extra pause when it's your small blind to evaluate whether you should shove. Same thing with the button. But then once people don't see a button or a blind in front of them, they kind of go into autopilot and just fold everything except for maybe a certain range that looks like, you know, ace 10 or pocket 7s and, you know, stuff like that. But when you are six-handed plus, you will find that there are a surprising number of shoves from the cutoff when the blinds are, you know, high, like when you have like 7 to 10 blinds. There will be a surprising number of shoves. And this isn't one that I necessarily had any question of myself on, but I thought it would be kind of instructive for those of you who maybe don't quite get that. So let me set up the hand in the wizard. So given the default ranges, it says this fold is just a bit worse than breaking even, but of course you cannot accept the default ranges. Now, something I don't think I've brought up in a video before, but one thing you do not want to make the mistake of when there are additional players in the hand, when it's not just you on the small blind, big blind, you don't want to just adjust the ranges here, like in the graphical portion of the, what is that, those weird artifacts? Let me just wipe those away. Must be some Java thing or something. You don't want to make the mistake of just adjusting the ranges up here in the graphical interface, right? Because there are certain things that it doesn't account for. For example, if I shove here, this guy is going to call me with a certain range. Does that mean that these guys always fold? They say, oh, two guys are all in. I'm going to fold aces. I'm going to fold kings. No, they have certain ranges that they're willing to overcall with, right? And you have to take, the math has to take that into account. And I find that a lot of the time, the overcall ranges that Sit and Go Wizard uses are fairly ridiculous. So what you actually have to do is go down. Let me, oh, damn it, my screen's not quite big enough. You actually have to go down and mess with these overcall ranges. And if you haven't done this before, this might be instructive for you. So maybe we'll end on this hand. Basically, the way this works is through indentations equal different layers of action, right? So the first, line is going to be I push, right? The second line is indented, and that is, well, what happens if, what is the button willing to also push with, right? So you might assign him a certain range. Now, if we look at the scenario up here, there's enough of it in the screen. Whoops, hold on, let me cancel out of that. Yeah, I think enough of it's in the screen, which ends about right there. So if we push, what is the button willing to push with? Well, a random probably isn't, ace 5 and ace 7 suited. Probably not pocket 4s, but probably somewhere in here, So he's got that. And now if I were to shove and he were to shove, this next indentation says, well, if you two were to shove, what would the next guy get involved with? That's what the indentation means. What would he overcall with? Now, that's probably actually a good-looking range right there. Maybe it would be a little wider. Who knows? But I'm willing to go with it because some guys might even, be narrower than that. Maybe we'll go with that. Ace-Jack suited, add in some 9s. Okay, now, unfortunately, Sit and Go Wizard can't go more than 3 pushes deep. So you don't get to do overcalls. So this next indentation says, all right, forget this guy even exists. Let's assume that the guy who overcalls is this guy. And in the big blind, he might, he's getting the best price. What's his stack look like? His stack looks like that. He's getting the best price, so he might be willing to come along again with a range that probably looks pretty reasonable, like that. Now, all right, forget the button pushes. Now, what happens if we forget this whole tree, forget that exists, say they all fold instead? What happens with the small blind? It decides to get involved. What range of hands will he get involved with? Well, I don't see him having a range this wide at all. Probably something like that. Again, ace 10, sixes plus, maybe narrow or maybe a little wider, but I think that's a good average. And then what would the big blind be willing to overcall with? Now, again, it might be something like that, somewhere in there, something like that. And so again, now we forget that this range happened. We've adjusted all those. Then we go, what would the big blind call with? Now we're going to get some respect because we're in the cutoff. We're not on the button or the small blind, which are sort of the notorious stealing positions. And we are going to get a little bit of respect. So maybe we'll get called with something like that. Again, he has the best price to call us. Maybe he won't fold king jack suited, but it's hard to say. Ace 5 suited will be in there. But we'll leave that in there just like that. And I'll accept that. And all of a sudden, we just by adjusting the ranges properly down here, we've taken, well, of course we're not done, but we'll get to that. We've taken what looks like a break-even shove or slightly negative to something that's pretty solidly positive and mandatory, and with a wide range of hands. I mean, 10-4 suited from the cutoff. Would that even occur to you to do that? Just make sure we have the blinds at the right level. Yeah, we do, because sometimes that you'll do that. You'll get through the whole thing, forget to adjust the blinds, and you just said it was instantaneous. So, but we're not done, because if we fold, do these guys just fold? Do they just say, "Oh, vandweller folded, so we don't need to play a hand"? No, they have ranges that they will push with and call with themselves, and that has to be a part of the math. I mean, we know if we can assign them ranges, then we know how often they'll conflict and how much equity they'll do it with. So why wouldn't we take that into account? Now, for some reason, leaving again these weird artifacts on the screen, which really bother me. So we can do this. Now, if you were the button in this scenario, let's reset the hand and try to get the blinds in there and the button. There we go. Now, if we folded, what would the button do? The button would have a certain range that he would push. Now, what would the button push here? Well, that guy's the button. It doesn't show it. And the blinds are 15-30. But he would shove probably a range that looks something like that, maybe a little wider, actually. And what would the small blind call with? Well, I don't know. Somewhere in there. Maybe not the worst aces, but I don't know, something like that. Maybe he couldn't get rid of king queen, but maybe he would have folded ace 4. You can't adjust the ranges in Sit and Go Wizard how you want them. And then what would the big blind overcall with? And it might be something that looks just like that. Now, say the small blind didn't get involved, what would the big blind just call with the button with? Well, it could be, again, maybe he knows what the button's up to. Maybe he's got a read. Maybe it would be something like that. All right, so now let's say this whole tree is gone. The button didn't push. Now let's say this folded to the small blind and he pushed. What would he be willing to push with? Well, he's got this guy here. He's got, what, a little over 7 blinds, so maybe he's willing to push with a wide range. And maybe the big blind knows what's up and will call with him, consequently wider with something like that. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe they're too tight. Who knows? So now we've adjusted everything. Now we know what will happen if we push, all the overcalls, or at least most of them. And if we fold, what will happen, who will push and who will overcall and so forth. So we've adjusted all, and that's what you have to do. If you're just adjusting the ranges up here, you're not going to get the fuller picture. All right, we gave both these guys 9.1 and this guy's 13.7. Let's reset the hand. Am I actually able to do that? Yeah. Let's reset the hand. Now, our push was plus 0.44 of a prize pool. Now, let's give these guys just the ranges. Let's see how different it is by just giving them the ranges that we assigned him here without making any of the adjustments. And what do we give that guy? 13? Does it end up being all that different? Well, it ends up being a better push than we thought it would be. But that's because these guys, we showed that they're probably going to conflict more than Sit and Go Wizard realizes, right? So that means that our equity, when we fold, is going to go up a little bit more often because one of these guys is going to get eliminated more often than this program assumes, right? So we found out that if we just adjust these ranges, we're going to get the impression that it's huge. But when we go back and actually fix everything, we realize that it's still a very solid shove, but maybe not as big or as wide, right? So when we go back to, again, we said that this would be, what, 44% would be this range. Now, of course, I undid all the hard work I did. So, but let's take a look at what that 44% looks like. Let me find a. I mean, I'm not adjusting it for that, but what does 44% look like? Oh no, I'm sorry. It was actually 0.44, and I didn't see what. Let me pause it and reset all the stuff again. All right. Well, probably didn't get it exactly right because it came out 0.46, but it's close enough. Here we go. Let me get it back in the shot. There we go. Sorry about that. So we adjusted all that stuff. Now, in this scenario, right here, let me reset it so you can see the blinds and the thing. Right, here it is. We're in the cutoff. This setup, right? Take a look at that. Would it occur to you to shove hands like 8-6 suited, 7-6 suited, King 3 suited, Ace 4 offsuit, 10-9 offsuit, pocket 2s? Maybe not. But I just wanted to sort of bring this hand up to show you that so you'll be on the lookout when you're reviewing your own games to not just pass over. If we had looked at this and sit and go wizard in just the check, green check mark mode, then it would have shown that it wouldn't even show. This wouldn't have shown up. It would have just been a green check mark. But I want you to be on the lookout for hands in the cutoff when it's 7 to 10 blinds, 6 to 10 blinds, and less. You can often shove a lot wider than you think. And also, the other lesson is make sure you're adjusting the ranges properly down here and not just settling for adjusting them up here. So how long is this now? This is now 1 hour and 15 minutes. It's certainly long enough. I do have a lot more hands that I can go over. I mean, I just basically got to this Queen 10 hand, and I do have other hands from January, like that many more hands. So if you all want to see a part 2 of it, if you thought it was interesting, let me know, and I will make a part 2. But until that time, I will see you again, and hey, good luck at the tables.